of the my absolute privilege to be the chair of the National Pharmacy Association. And it's also actually a really great pleasure to introduce Mike this evening. Mike will introduce himself a little bit, but for me personally, when I joined the NPA board, Mike was actually my vice chair and one of the key reasons why I joined the NPA. So we were joking just before we started, it's all your fault, Mike, that I now chair the organisation, and you can hold that for better or for worse and choose what you would to do with it. But without further ado, I'm really pleased for Mike to run this session. I'm actually really looking forward to it and having seen some of the content. And Mike, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. My name's Mike Hewitson. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a pharmacy contractor in West Dorset, chair of Community Pharmacy Dorset, former NPA board member, former member of what was PSNC, is now CPE. Done lots of things over the years. And I think I'm pretty well placed to dive into a little bit of the detail under the bonnet of the contract. So what we're hoping tonight is going to be is a bit of information, a bit of thought provoking, and hopefully quite interactive. So please don't stand on ceremony if you want to ask a question, if you want to join in, if you want to uh, um, get involved, then don't stand on ceremony. Feel free to take yourself off mute, or stick your hand up, and I'll come to you as best we can. There's just a few more people coming in. Nick, are you able to keep an eye on the waiting room and just let people in as and when?
Yeah, no problem at all,
I'll
Mike.
let people in as well.
Oh,
Thanks.
thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Cool. So, why are we here then? So I thought I'd start with a message from our new boss, which is Wes Streeting. So prior to him becoming the Secretary of State for Health, he said this. He said, pharmacies are capable of so much more than dispensing medicines or selling shampoo. And I think that's a really important starting point for all of us here, is that we have to think about doing something more than dispensing. We've got to up our game in terms of what we do, how we do it, in order to stay relevant and to make sure that the pharmacy is there in the future. So, who am I? This is just a little bit of background from me. So, um, I'm an independent prescriber. I won the Independent Community Pharmacy magazine Prescriber of the Year a couple of years ago, which was quite a pleasing accolade from the point of view that I never saw myself as a prescriber. I never saw that as part of my pharmacy journey. But it's something that's really revolutionized what I do and how I do it. If you're not a prescriber, I really would encourage you to take a bit of time to invest in yourself and go out there and do what you need to do to become one. If you don't, there will be, from next year, I think every pharmacy graduate is going to be a prescriber on registration. So there's a huge incentive for us to start upskilling now. The future is really going to be based around prescribing about both long-term condition management, but also about acute care. So some of the things I've done in my career, I've been a COVID site lead. I think we're now up to more than 50,000 COVID jabs over the last 3 years. I think when we started out, I was hopeful we might do 5,000. So to have achieved more than 50,000 is I think really pleasing, because it's meant that we've helped tens of thousands of people go to weddings and meet family and do all the things that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So something I'm really, really proud of. But that's enough about me anyway. So I thought tonight we'd start to look at where we are, why we're here. And then the question that very few people actually ask is, so what? So what can I do about it? What does all of this stuff mean? And how do I make positive change in my business? At the end of the day, every single pharmacy business in the country is under enormous pressure. I think we're currently quoting, was it 75, 80% of pharmacies are currently losing money. We've seen 800 pharmacy closures over the last 12 months. The rate is increasing. We're seeing more and more pharmacies struggling to pay the bills. Um, you don't need me to tell you any of that because that's your reality every single day as you go into the pharmacy. We're like hamsters on a wheel. We're going faster and faster and faster to stay still, or in most cases, to go backwards. So I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about so what could we do different, and really tonight, if we only did one thing as a result of coming together and having a conversation, what will that one thing be in your business? What will you take away? What will you do different? So I think if we can all do that one thing, then we'll start the positive journey of change today. So, where are we? So, we all know that pharmacy funding's been static for the last 11 years. Um, what you don't see is this. So, this is some data that I pulled together looking at various different indices. So, I've indexed everything back to 2014 because basically I view the world as everything up to 2014, which is when we were still getting funding increases, when pharmacy was still seen as part of the solution. And then we went through this dreadful last 10 years where actually pharmacies has been seen as a cost and not a value in many respects. So I've indexed these things back to what they would have cost in 2014 because we're dealing with quite a long time frame now. So I think the main message that I want to get across to you here is no, it's not just the fact that funding has stayed flat. It's the fact that workload is up. So this blue line here is what funding's done in real terms. So accounting for inflation. So funding is down by roughly, well, it's about 40% in real terms. But we've also seen dispensing workload rising. That's up by circa 20%. We've also seen, if you add in the workload associated with services, so your workload is probably up by about 30% overall at the same time. Workload's done that, funding's done that, and we're all feeling the pain of the gap in the middle between workload and funding. The other thing that's really important to point out is the impact of the national living wage here, which is getting on for a 200% increase pretty much since 2014. I think it was about six something an hour at that point. It's going to be 12.21, is it next year? 11.44 this year. So the trajectory there has been about increasing minimum wage, which is pushing up the cost for not just people on the minimum wage, as you all know, it's had a massive knock-on impact up the differential scale in pharmacy. So it wipes out the differential between your counter assistant and your dispensers, for example. Nobody wants to take the extra responsibility of working in the dispensary necessarily without some reward for doing that. At the end of the day, most pharmacy staff could probably get more sat on the tills at a supermarket, which is pretty depressing and should be depressing for all of us. Something that I think government should feel rightly ashamed of. Our staff are the key to trying to work our way out of the problem we currently find ourselves in. Um, so we all know NHS funding's been flat as a pancake. It's not gone anywhere since 2014, which is the last time that we saw an increase. I thought this was an interesting thing just to remark on, which is basically the funding per pharmacy that we receive from the NHS, which is actually higher than it was in 2014. It's just the impact of the greater workload that we're seeing now is sort of wiping that out. And this is entirely a function of the fact that so many pharmacies have closed now. We're seeing pharmacies working faster and faster to absorb the higher workload from pharmacies that have already closed. So nobody feels better as a result of having this slight increase in funding over time, because we're just all hamsters on a wheel, just going faster and faster, just to stay still. Um, this is what's happened to funding over time, as you can see. This isn't news to anyone. The green line is what's happened in terms of prescribing volume. We're up to one and a quarter, no, 1.125 billion items now, and that number is set to increase. Over the next 5 years, more of the post-war sort of baby boom generation will go from being 70 somethings to 80 somethings. And as they do, prescription volumes will rise. More people will hit 60, and they'll start to see more and more items prescribed. So I would say prescription volume is only going to go up over time as the population increases, as people get older, as people continue to live longer lives and to be more ill, or to live with more ailments as they get on a bit. Um, so you'll have obviously already heard that we had this extra 645 million quid from the Primary Care Recovery Fund, which came in, I suppose, Pharmacy First, which launched last January, was the first time we could get any cash out of it. Immediately, 112 million of that 645 was allocated to recover excess fee delivery in the prior year. So basically, we're the only profession in the world that does more work than we were contracted to do, but because we've got a fixed price contract, we end up having to pay that money back. So it's a bit like you doing the overtime and then the boss turning around and going, well, no, that overtime I paid you, I want it back now because you've got a salary, and you're only entitled to your salary. I think it's absolutely perverse. What I'm trying to say to you all here is that we're never going to win the game of dispensing more and more items, because funding is becoming more dilute, and over time, the value of each prescription is only going to fall in terms of what the government's either willing or able to pay for it. The other thing, you have to forgive me for a moment, just get on my little hobby horse. So the other problem we've got with the contract as it currently stands is margin. So 31% of your income comes from this nebulous stuff we call margin. The problem is that nobody actually knows where that money goes in the system. So there's the margin survey, which is a sort of statistical model, which is able to say with a degree of certainty that we think the right amount of money is going to pharmacy overall, which is great if you're Boots because you can average the swings and roundabouts, as we were told all the time. There's some winners, some losers in terms of what you're making money on. So this month you might be losing money on quetiapine, but you might be making it on venlafaxine, and you take the rough with the smooth, and overall it sort of works out. It's great if you Boots, but actually overall as independents, because we can't average the impact of margin out over a large estate. I'm not sure that it's actually working for us these days as a mechanic. It works by a system of averages. So literally, half of us in this room will be winners, will be getting more margin than the rest, and half of us will be losers. But the problem with margin, as I see it, is that everyone thinks they can buy better than everyone else. So everyone thinks they're in the top half of that margin curve. So I think there's definitely something for us all to think about as to whether margin is the right tool to distribute funding to pharmacies. I understand as a taxpayer that it's been hugely successful in helping to drive down costs for taxpayers. It's been great for the NHS because we pay some of the lowest prices for generic medicines in the developed world. But actually, for us, there's only so much we can drive off the cost of a torvastatin or a pixaban, and now we're starting to see the sort of elastic effects of driving the price too low. So Pixapan dropped like a stone. The price of it dropped by 90% pretty much within the first 6 weeks of it coming off patent. And then we got a bit of a dead man bounce recently where the price of a Pixapan shot back up again because actually, all of the profit had come out of that molecule after the tariff price had been reduced. And consequently, manufacturers pulled back or a supply disruption arose for whatever reason. You can be as cynical as me and wonder if they're ever as real as the wholesalers tell us. But in reality, it doesn't really matter what's causing the problem because we're paying the bills at the end of the day, and it's us have to take the hit when prices shoot through the roof.
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you want questions that come through from the chat? Do you want me to highlight these
Yeah, yeah.
that come through?
Feel
Or
free, Nick.
yeah,
So, if you've got anything that's come up so far, I mean, do you
yeah.
want to stop there for a second?
Yeah, just on this one particular thing, we've got a question in from Sanjay. CPE said there are not really winners and losers in community pharmacy as reimbursement for our services is below cost overall. Sounds like there's just losers and
Yeah,
losers in
yeah,
that
it's
situation.
losers and losers. I think you're absolutely right there. That's a probably a more depressing way of looking at it, but you know,
And and the other comment from Sean was that actually single-handed independent community pharmacies are often in the losers of that because maybe it's not actually 50% of us and maybe winners and 50% of us maybe losers. It may be that people with larger buying power may be in the winners and more of us would
yeah.
be
I mean, so
losers.
this is a the fact is that the margin survey and therefore the 800 million quid that we're allowed to keep is based on the buying margin of independents. So 1 to 5 branches are the only people that get called as part of the margin survey, and as a result of that, it all depends on how well we buy. So the statistical model can't tell you who. I can't say, Nick, you're doing pretty well here. It's fiendishly difficult to audit your procurement margin. Um, my buying group produces a report, and I can see at a granular level what I've paid, what I've been reimbursed for stuff. Um, but it's really, really tricky to try and work out exactly what your purchase margin is. If I ask any of you in the room, what's your margin? You'll give me a gross margin. You'll say my margin's 33%, 35%. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the procurement margin. So what you've paid for the drug. Uh, so what you get reimbursed minus what you've paid for it. That's really what I would be looking at. Anyway, let me just move on a second. So I didn't want to get sidetracked too much with margin because I could spend all night talking about it. One of the things we don't know is what the confidence intervals of the margin distribution look like. So we don't know, if between I don't know 90 and 110% of overall margin is being delivered to contractors. I can't give you the figure. Nobody will publish the confidence intervals, and as a result, we don't know where that margin is going. So I would say anyone that wants more margin in the contract wants their head reading simply from the point of view that it's a bit like gambling with a third of your income. You're never quite sure whether you've achieved it or not, and you might be the best um, procurement manager in the world in terms of being able to shave a penny off this and a pound off that. But at the end of the day, it's a bit of a cul-de-sac in terms of policy terms. Government's kept this figure fixed for a long period of time now. It doesn't really, although it very much needs us to keep procuring, it doesn't necessarily value the procurement role and the risk that we take accordingly. Um, so I thought it was probably useful just as a reality check. I heard a conservative politician on the radio not long after the election saying that they'd given record funding increases to the NHS and why was the service getting so bad. So I looked at the NHS budget overall and then I adjusted that for inflation, which is what you can see here. Um, Inflation is absolutely the thing that's killing all of us right now. So you can see the value of every pound that's been spent on the NHS declining. So the real terms spending cuts in terms of the value of NHS funding is about 30% less than it was in 2014. So, um, sorry, there's been a 30% real term, 30% increase in overall funding, but the real terms value of that's gone down hugely in that time. So why are we here? So one of the things I want to talk about is the population and the demographics that we're dealing with. Um, the strategic underinvestment from the NHS and the failure of the NHS and community pharmacy to modernise. So this is what I was talking about earlier on. These are some population demographics. In my spare time for fun, I'm a local councillor here in Somerset, so we spend a lot of time looking at just in the middle of flu and COVID season. So we're all a little bit off the boil on this one at the moment, but it is absolutely an enormous service. So as I say, we've delivered about 50K's worth, sorry, 50,000 COVID jabs. My hero, I believe Michael Ball might be on the call. My absolute hero in the whole wide world is Michael. If you're on the call, please say hello. Mike's done huge hundreds of thousands of COVID vaccines over the last few years, and yeah, I understand not everyone got the opportunity to do those, but now there's a lot more flexibility and scope for pharmacists to sign up to these services, and they can be incredibly lucrative if you can crack the process. So um, during during October, I think I gave about 3,000 COVID and flu jabs by myself. I didn't have anyone drawing up. I didn't have anyone entering data for me. I did administration, data entry, draw up, all within a minute for patients, which was hard bloody work. I'll be honest with you. But actually, that one service generated about 20, 20 odd £1,000 worth of profit in that month. And that is absolutely the difference between keeping the lights on and not keeping the lights on for most of us. Um, I think you can easily complete co-administration of flu and COVID within 2 minutes. Have your counter staff have people's arms ready. Use the team to shave off precious seconds here and there. Try and reduce as much of the faffing around as you possibly can do when it comes to services. We're trying to scrape the barnacles off the boat in terms of what it's the length of time it takes for our pharmacists to do X, Y, Z. Now you'll be able to use your technicians potentially to deliver these services on their own without the input of a pharmacist, since technicians are being added to patient group directions. It means that potentially you can have your technicians doing this, and it becomes even more economically efficient, and actually helps to to keep the whole pharmacy flowing. Because the one problem I have when I'm jabbing is, I've still got prescriptions to check. Because the minute you put in a second pharmacist, there ain't no point to you doing it. There's no point to you running the service because you're basically giving away most of your profit in the day. The most COVID vaccine, COVID, most vaccines I did in October is I did 750 in a day. I think it was 750. It was one a minute for the whole day for a 7.5 hour day. So somebody who's cleverer than me can do the maths very quickly. I don't know what that gets to, but it was one a minute for 7.5 hours. And that is going some, but it is absolutely um, worth so much more than uh, dispensing. So, for example, that 20 odd thousand just from COVID, adding in flu on top of that, we just had the payment land and it was about 50K for that 1 month for those two services. Um, that is um, your £1.27 and 50,000 divided by £1.27 is an awful lot of bloody items to dispense to get that same level of money. So you have to think about how you can get the most money out of your business, most revenue from your patients that you can in the shortest amount of time possible. Um, we've already talked about margin to an extent, but you know, it's it's getting spread more and more thinly over time as the number of items goes up. The amount of target margin goes down per item. So target margin is basically what I would say in an average period, you divide the total number of items by the 800 million divided by the total number of items, and that'll give you a figure which at the moment would probably work out at about 70 odd, 72p or something like that. Um, that's what you should be trying to achieve in terms of your procurement when you're buying medicines. It will go up and down depending on what your dispensing mix looks like. So if you're using lots of generics or lots of brands, it'll go up or down depending on your period of treatment. So if you're in an 84-day area, you'll get more margin than if you were in a 28-day area. So one of the things that I think is becoming increasingly difficult for the government to tolerate is the equity of margin distribution. So if you take a Pixaban, um, anyone here from Luton, Bedford, and Milton Keynes? Pixaban, it was worth about 200 million quid in margin. Um, if you have a pharmacy in Bedford, Luton, and Milton Keynes, ICB, you use less apixaban than contractors anywhere else in the country. So if apixaban was worth 200 million quid's worth of margin, um, when you compare it to the highest prescribing area, which was Gloucestershire, they prescribed 16 times the amount of apixaban per head um, than they did in Luton, Bedford, and Milton Keynes, which means that if that was worth 25% of the overall margin, a pharmacy in Gloucestershire was laughing all the way to the bank on potentially something like 40K's worth of procurement margin, whereas the pharmacy in Bedford would only be earning about 4K of that same margin pie. What I want to get across to all of you is, we can't change your geography. I can't suddenly pick up your pharmacy and move it to the other side of the country. You might be able to get some changes to prescribing, but effectively, margin is what it is. You need to try and do it as efficiently as you can, but changing it is a bit of a Herculean task, really. Um, this is me looking
Right,
at my
Mark, do you want to have a couple of sort of questions and observations as we've gone through? Is that
yeah,
okay? So, yeah, yeah. So there's been a couple of observations again with pharmacy first, which I think you're coming to about some of the minimum sort of gateways and criteria that's been there. A couple of people worried that at 750 vaccines a day that you're working unsustainably. People worried for your
yeah, yeah,
company.
yeah. That's so
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah. Which is and is that a sustainable business model? And it'd be great just to comment on that. And then some comments I think around the actual there's some stuff we're talking here about services, but also should we be talking about the dispensing stuff? And I think that's what you're highlighting now, that the way the contract's currently
yeah.
about for the basic dispensing services, it
So,
can be a challenge to deliver that. So
sure.
just some comments there, well, mainly about your well-being, Mr. Hughes.
Let me go with that one from the start. So, I don't do 750 vaccines every single day of the week. That was the peak. And I've been doing this for a long, long, long time now. We've very much scraped the barnacles off the boat in terms of being able to do this efficiently. But I wouldn't encourage anyone to work at that rate, to be honest. But it is. just to illustrate to you that something else is possible. By not focusing as much on dispensing, we had signs up in the pharmacy saying, that the vaccination service is critical to keeping the doors open. When people were moaning about having to wait, etc., actually it softened some of the blow from them because we'd explained to them why it was a critical part of our business model overall. Not every pharmacy can do that, but I think if you were able to do 1,000 flu jabs and 1,000 COVID, which is absolutely achievable for every pharmacy, that is a significant contribution to your bottom line. It will help you to defray the losses on brands and generics that we're all seeing at the moment. So, you know, I'm not going to. I wasn't specifically going to speak about dispensing at a loss, but this graph here will illustrate to you why we're all busy fools if we focus on nothing but the margin. So this was going back to my procurement data from I think this was February last year. So it's a little bit old now, but the fundamentals haven't changed hugely. This is looking at the procurement profit on a 21,000 item basket across two pharmacies. This was looking at the profit that we were able to earn on those items. So on the left-hand side here are the profitable things, and on the right-hand side are the things that we're losing money on. So, people always talk about dispensing at a loss. Actually, you know, it's a smaller number overall, but it's just as painful for us. In this particular month, I had 6 individual prescriptions that were responsible for 22% of our procurement margin. So the majority of stuff was supplied at little or no margin at all. This is what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is around the fact that margin now has been spread so thinly that one or two things can have a massive impact on your overall procurement. So I think clonidine solution. I've got one patient on clonidine solution, and they have 600 or 800 mils, and it's like 100 and something quid per bottle reimbursement price. And you know, of course, I'm going to care about where I buy that from. I'm going to care about what I'm paying for that. Um, but I tell you what, I make hell of a lot more on that than I do from dispensing all of the atorvastatin, atenolol, and half the other A drugs that I can think of, which are all sat in the middle here, earning me bugger all. So, there's something here about know where the profit is in your business and look to maximize what you can. But really, what I'm saying to you is that the vast majority of your dispensing is just going to wash its face, and that's increasingly where we're going to be. So I did some data crunching, looking at the impact of stock shortages, because this is something that really winds me up. So this is data from August this year. 149 price concessions were granted, and using data from open prescribing, 9.5 million items were affected in that 1 month, right? Every time you touch a prescription twice, you're losing money. Every time you going back to, you know, you think about the process of owing something. You've got to issue an owing note. You've got to tell the patient you haven't got it. You've got to order it. You've then got to unpack it. You've got to stick it back on a shelf. You've got to redispense it. You've got to get the patient back in. You've got to find the bloody prescription again when the patient comes in from the second time. They've had to wait twice. We don't want owings because they're effectively costing us a huge amount of money. There's some stuff we have absolutely no control over. I would say that having looked at the numbers, something like 1 in 4 prescriptions had an owing on it in this particular period, or had a price concession on it in this particular period, which is equivalent to about half a whole time equivalent member of staff per pharmacy. it is not an insignificant amount of money. It is massively labor intensive, and if I could say one thing, like um, it's about getting your stock levels right here. You don't want stock levels that are through the floor and might look really economically efficient because you've got no cash sat on a shelf. But if you're having to owe everything, then you're pretty much doubling your workload. So it's about trying to find the right balance there to minimize the amount of cash you've got tied up, but also um, trying to reduce the bumps in the overall process efficiency. Um, so really, the crux of today is to talk about the opportunity cost. Okay, so the other way of saying this is what else could you be doing with your time? So what else could I be doing with my time that'll earn me more money, that will provide me more income to make my business more sustainable? Um, so there's a few definitions here on what opportunity cost is, but I want to draw your attention particularly to the bottom line, which is if I'm providing free services, um, I can't be using that time to provide services that are actually generating revenue for my business. So we looked at this a while back. The cost of MDS. These are my they're not back of a fag packet because they took a lot of time to work through. These are costs for my business, but I think I've no reason to suspect our business is any more or less efficient than any other pharmacy. So this is trying to work out what it costs us to provide this service. So consumables, I gave it a fairly generous pound a week to buy in the packs. Um, I priced a member of staff at about 17 quid per hour, which was including on cost and obviously your overhead for your buildings, etc. Um, and I tried to work out what a single member of staff could do in an hour, and I figured that 4 monthly NDS, so it's about 16 individual trays, was probably about all that any human being could manage and still have their thumbs uh, attached. Then you've got the pharmacist cost and fair return, which, as I said to you, I always price at a pound a minute. If you can't do it in under that, then something's going wrong somewhere. And a conservative estimate, 1.5 minutes to check each item. So, just as a for instance, and a patient with 7 item MDS, the revenue we're going to generate is about £112 per year. It's going to cost me 52 quid a year in consumables. It's going to cost me about 50 quid a year to fill it in terms of the staff time. It's going to cost me about 150 quid of pharmacist time to fill it. So when you add all those figures up, it means that on that 7 item prescription, I've lost 130 quid a year. I'd be better off if I never saw this patient again. If they never walked through my door, I'd be 130 quid a year better off than I was from doing this. Um, so if we
Mike,
think,
just a question. Those figures were based on monthly, not weekly scripts, which is what most ICBs are pushing people towards, I assume. But that was just a question that came
yeah,
through.
so um, most ICBs, I think, still have major hang-ups about weekly prescribing, and I think we should all probably consider weekly prescribing as not something that we ideally want to do. So why do I say that? So if you have one patient on 7 items uh, prescribed monthly, then that's going to be what's that, about 100 and odd items a year. And if you have them on weekly, that's like 4 times the amount. Um, that may feel great to us in the long term, but because we're on a fixed price contract, right? So the more dispensing that happens, the more we slice the overall pie thinner and thinner. So if everyone was doing this, then we'd be having a single activity fee of 20p an item. That's not sustainable because we're on a fixed price contract. The more work we do overall, and you could say, well, I'm all right, Jack. You can take a very individual view that you you're generating more items for your own pharmacy, and that's good for you. Brilliant. But you have to think about the workload impact on your team. You have to think about the overall impact on pharmacy funding, which isn't good. If you've got millions and millions and millions of items going out the door in terms of MDS fees, then that's diluting the global sum for all of us. It slices the single activity fee smaller and smaller, which ain't a good thing for any of us in the long run. So just talking about the opportunity cost. So if you just think just about the staff time that you were filling the MDS, and just think about your hypertension case finding service, for example. So um, uh, I've put the numbers on the screen. You can read the numbers. Effectively, I can generate a hell of a lot more profit from my dispenser doing hypertension case finding than I've got from them filling MDS, for example. If I've got that pharmacist redeploying that time that they've saved from not doing the MDS into NMS, then that generates a profit. Okay, so versus 130 quid loss for that one particular patient, I could have generated 300 odd pounds in profit. So we're basically 500 quid better off as a result of not doing the MDS and focusing on the services that have generated the revenue for us. And even if worst case scenario, that patient has gone to a different pharmacy and you never see them again, you're still 130 quid better off as a result of not incurring the costs associated with filling the thing in the first place. So, you know, I want to just get across to you that we need to think about valuing our time and looking at how we maximize the value of our time on every given day. Um, this is a mantra that you should all live by. If you don't value your time, neither will others. So, what can you do differently? What can you stop doing, and how can you do things differently? So, I immediately would start by eliminating free services. So, MDS, we got two pharmacies. We trialed withdrawing in one, and we've just finished withdrawing in the other. And I think we started off with there's about 75 patients in the one pharmacy. We offered them a choice. We said either you can pay £300 a year, you can pay £35 a month, or you can go back to original pack dispensing, or you can try and go somewhere else if you like. We were the last stupid buggers on the planet offering this service. Nobody else in our area was providing it. Everyone else had dropped it. So I knew that the risk of people being able to go somewhere else was relatively low. And yes, there are online providers that they could potentially go to. Right. So of the 75 that we started with, I think about 10 opted to pay the £300 a year. Great. I'm 300 quid, £3,000 a year better off than I was when I started. Um, uh, the majority moved to original pack dispensing. I didn't lose a single patient overall, um, which is not necessarily going to be everyone's experience, but I think you explain it to people in the right way, you give people the right support. Potentially, it's something you can do without causing any major problems to your patients. Um, this is something that really, really bugs me. So I've invested a lot in my own development. So I'm an independent prescriber. I've done some additional training in dermatology, right? It really annoys me when people come in and expect free advice from me, especially when they're not my patient. So I get people coming in all the time who, oh, well, I just thought I'd speak to the pharmacist. Okay, how can I help? Firstly, can I just take your name? Are you one of our patients? Oh no, I normally go to Boots, but they're too busy. And I thought you'd probably give me better advice. I'm like, I'm also too busy, right? I probably wouldn't be safe for me to advise you. I don't have access to your records. I think you should probably go to your regular pharmacist to get advice. If it's something simple, if something quick, of course I'll do that. And we all want to generate a bit of goodwill. But we shouldn't allow people to take the mick out of us. If you don't value your time, nobody else will. So um, I'm I charge for consultations. So if somebody wants to come in and talk to me, 15 quid charge for a sit down conversation, particularly if it ends in a prescription. So we charge for the time. We don't charge for the prescription itself. So whether the prescription is issued or not, there's still going to be a fee associated with that. And you might think, well, patients in my area won't pay that, but I tell you what, if people don't value what they don't pay for, if people do value your advice, and we all like to think that our advice is something that patients do value, do trust, then I wouldn't worry so much about charging for it because generally, from what I've seen, people are perfectly happy to pay for good advice, but you may need to make it good advice. So that's why you need to invest in your development, invest in your premises, and invest in trying to add value back to patients. For goodness sake, stop doing the informal referrals from GP practices. So, oh, the GP told me to come and see you. I've got a cough. Right. Okay. Well, you're not covered by the Pharmacy First service for a start, and you might sell them something. But again, if you price your time on £1 a minute, if you spend 5 minutes talking to a patient to sell them a packet of paracetamol, you've lost money. Okay, you have to value your time because if you don't, you will quickly bleed yourself dry. Bottom one's a bit controversial, right? So I put phone calls in here. So we installed a cloud-based phone system during COVID. I haven't looked at the data recently because it scares me every time I look at it. But the for two pharmacies during the peak of COVID, so probably I was just off peak, maybe June 2020. Between two pharmacies, we took 8,000 phone calls in 7 weeks, right? Every one of those um, is gonna tie up your. I can have 7 members of staff answering the phone at any given time. And do you know what they tell me? They tell me I still don't answer the bleeding phone. You know, oh, there's no point ringing the phone, so you never answer the phone. I'm like, I can have 7 people answering the phone at any given time. And the problem with the phone system is it just keeps ringing, it keeps trying to find somebody to answer the phone. So you should think about that. And I'm not saying never answer your phone, but I think we need to find ways of managing it. So diverting people wherever possible to alternative mechanisms. So apps if you've got them, and websites if you've got them, and emails if you've got them. There are other ways of managing that demand because half the time I pick the phone up and somebody's going, "Is my prescription ready?" And it's like, I can either spend all afternoon telling you your prescription's not ready, or I can get your bloody prescription ready. I can't do both things at the same time. So, I would definitely ask you to look at that. So, Nick, you talked about my unsustainable workload. Let's talk about your unsustainable workload. So, if you divide the amount of time that pharmacist has these days by the number of items that you receive, taking off time to see patients, etc., my calculations show that you need to check one item every 40 seconds for the whole of the month to meet your quota. And we do, between 9 and 11,000 items a month. You're there for 40 hours a week, and there's 60 minutes in every hour. You can do them yourself. Sooner or later, we hit a point where it's physically impossible for the pharmacist to um, check things as quickly as we need to. These are some things you could do differently. Okay, so you could look at automation, you could look at technology. There's a big price tag associated with a lot of that. We looked at automating our MDS, for example, and brilliant robots will do fantastic things, but in the end, I turned around and I pulled out of actually buying one because I couldn't make it work. And I didn't want to spend my whole life ringing up surgeries going, you've missed this off the prescription, or you've missed that off the prescription, or the dose has changed. There's a whole lot of hassle that comes along with MDS that I didn't necessarily want. So these are some things that you could do differently. So you could look at introducing delivery charges. You could look at changing phone calls to emails or text messages, trying to change who's doing what. So if you've got a service that allows a technician to deliver instead of a pharmacist, do it. If you've got one, use that flexibility. If you can use a counter assistant, even better. If you can use, you know, Jim, the delivery driver, might be the most brilliant person to sit down and have a cup of tea with people and take their blood pressure. I don't know, um, um, but there's lots of stuff that you could do differently from how we're managing it at the moment. Local automation is great. It's getting more reliable. It's getting cheaper. But this doesn't have to be just about the kit. It could be how we use it. So we could use our PMRs differently. So lots of them have barcode accuracy checking now. Some of them have automated clinical checking, so allowing you to free up your time. Lots of apps to do all sorts of things these days. So definitely look at what technological options you've got, which are open to you, which might solve some of your problems. So this is just giving you some numbers about our phone conundrum. I dare say that your phones ring as much as our phones ring, if not more. It is a major drain on your resource. Um, so thinking about who delivers what, I think is a really important step in making your pharmacy economically efficient. Um, and charging, we've already sort of started to discuss. Um, I would be really I wouldn't be concerned about introducing charges. I know it's something that we all sort of shy away from as pharmacists because you want to help the patient, or you want to feel like you're adding goodwill, or people can't afford it, or whatever reasons. Well, guess what? You can't afford it either. 75% of pharmacies are losing businesses. You're losing business, sorry, losing money right now. And if we're not careful, you'll lose your business if you keep giving away money forever. We can't afford to do this as much as patients may decide that they can't afford to do it. So in the other pharmacy where we're in the process of withdrawing the MDS, we had a similar list of 70, 80 patients, and a number of them turned around and said, "No, no, I'm not going to pay for this. I'll go back to original pack dispensing." And then you know what? Within the first few weeks, more often than not, it was the kids that would ring up and go, "I'll just pay it. I don't want that stress. I don't want that hassle on my shoulders every month." I'm like, neither do we. We introduced the charges and hoped as few people paid them as possible. We hoped people would go back to original pack dispensing because it's better for them and better for us. But if we're going to provide a service, that's what it costs to provide. We've not shied away from that, and we've probably across the two pharmacies got £6,000 or £7,000 from MDS charging over the last oh, over the 12-month period. I don't think that's an insignificant sum. That pays some of the national living wage increase. So this is the most important thing that I would like you to have a look at. So this is just looking at the numbers, looking at what's possible in terms of delivering revenue back to your pharmacy. These are just looking at the costs, looking at the revenue per hour, looking at the profit per hour. Um, I think that each of these things should be achievable in most pharmacies. You're probably, good operators are probably doing these anyway. So apologies if I'm teaching any of you to suck eggs, but this is absolutely critical to making sure that you make your services work for you. You don't want. I used to have a pharmacist who used to love doing flu, but she'd take 10 minutes to do every flu jab. She'd be like, "Yeah, I've just done 4 flu jabs in an hour. Brilliant." Like, okay, I did that in 10 minutes. You've got to get your pharmacists operating efficiently. Um, Revenue's only half the equation. We have to think about costs as well. So we talked about, what the impact of stopping MDS is. It's one of the single greatest things that we've done in our business over the last 2 years to help make us sustainable, because it's created so much capacity. It's meant that we've been able to cope when, you know, people are off sick or on holidays, without having to get in additional members of staff. Um, think about how you can get ready for the future by investing what precious resource we've all got at the moment in your clinical capacity and capability. So we did a refit on one of the pharmacies, and we've got 5 consultation rooms in the one site now. And the vision for that is really that, I can have a non-pharmacist delivering earwax microsuction at the same time that I've got the pharmacist delivering travel clinic, at the same time as I've got somebody else doing, a COVID clinic, beauty therapy. You have to think about how you can potentially maximize your return on those consultation rooms that you've got. Just want to bring you back down to earth. Sorry if this is proving a bit too cheery for all of you, but I just want to highlight the scale of the funding challenge to us. So we can wait for government to ride over the hill. So funding is this blue line. This is where we are today, right? Um, I would estimate the funding gap at the moment of being between 1 and 2 billion quid, and probably closer to the 2 billion end of the spectrum. It's eye-watering, and to find any government that's likely to reach into the back pocket and find that for us now is going to be a challenge. So we have to look to ourselves to try and get our businesses into the best shape we possibly can do in order to make ends meet. The White Knight is unlikely to ride to your rescue. So if after listening to me talking to you for 45 minutes, you only do one thing, what would it be? So Nick, what would it be?
Oh, I didn't know you were actually going to pick on me, Mike. We didn't rehearse
There we go.
that, which is great. So, thank you for that. I was going to say Mr. Vice Chair, but that's a flashback to my past. I think the things that you taught me, actually, Mike, actually is value my worth. That's the thing that I think that we've actually done. I love the way in which you break down the economic value into the things that we don't value as contractors and owners about ourselves and valuing our time. I think the other things that I've taken from today is, we've seen lots of people comment in there. People find it hard to take away those things that you've talked about from the communities and the people they've done. The clues in the title, isn't it? Community pharmacies. We'll have, people that have been working in their businesses and in their communities for 20, 30 years or over multiple generations. And actually to turn around to, that person that you've known and grown up with, or say, actually, we're going to charge for mum's MDS and delivery is a difficult thing to do. But actually, what you've highlighted to me in really stark terms is if we don't do that, then actually, a line you said, patients can't afford to, but we can't afford to. So, and that comes back to valuing my worth. So, I think, Mike, it's around the things being brave. And actually, somebody made a comment that actually it's difficult to do if we're not united. Well, actually, I think even if we're not united, actually what I've been hearing from you, most people won't leave you. Some people will pay. And actually, if they go somewhere else, then so be it, because they're losing the money and I'll survive and they won't. So, Mike, I've, as always, found that an amazing talk, the way in which you articulate both value and worth. And then overlay that with some practical things is genuinely something I found really fascinating.
One thing I would say is, we all worry about the impact on the community and on others, and that's one of the things I love about being a community pharmacist is looking after a population. But I can only do that if I'm there. If I'm not there anymore, then people won't be able to cope. I have people come into the pharmacy all the time and say, "Oh, I don't know what I'd do without you," and I'm like, "You don't know how close it is to not having us to look after you, because like 75% of pharmacies, we're still losing money. We've made a lot of investments in our premises and in our capacity and capability to try and generate an alternative to the NHS. So, we did 10 grand's worth of travel vaccines last month, which, is really helpful to help make ends meet. We've looked at generating more private services. So, yesterday I was in pharmacy and one of my colleagues had three earwax microsuction appointments, 2 ears each, 80 quid per patient, so 250 quid that member of staff had generated, which paid their salary probably for the whole week. And we've got to think differently about how we use our teams. It can't just be about shoving people into the dispensary. I know what it's like. EPS has really changed the game in terms of expectations. We all remember that back in the good old days, you get a pile of prescriptions from the surgery, you'd work through them, you'd finish them, and you could have 10 minutes to do date checking or do something else. Now with EPS, we can't do that. The expectations ramped up. What we've got to look at is actually making it more sustainable for our staff. People have got to enjoy coming to work in the pharmacy, because they're not doing it for the money. Let's face it. We've got to find ways of rewarding them in terms of their development and also helping them to use their skills to benefit those patients. I think I've got a couple of other slides, but I think that was pretty much all we wanted to say. Hang on, let me stop the share. There we go. So, open to any questions from anyone. Please don't be shy. We talked a little bit about dispensing and margin. Do you want to dive into some of those issues, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, happy to take questions. I'm conscious everyone's had really long days. I'm also conscious that there. I mean, I think the one thing I would say that what you've described there, Mike, is around the way in which you can actually, if you're redeploying the staff to, especially around the MDS, to do something different. I mean, this talk wasn't about private services, but that is something that I've seen in some of my business. That actually, when you redeploy people to do other things, they generate stuff that doesn't require the white knight of the NHS to come and save you in that way. I would also say as well, people should be really clear of the stuff that you're articulating to them around the NHS funding gap being somewhere between £1 and £2 billion. That is a huge number, and does articulate why we're all struggling. I mean, again, happy to open it to questions, or happy to say we've had lots of questions on there about both resource, about your slides, and I know that the team will be sharing those things as we go. So yeah.
Yeah, one other thing I'd say to you is that we can easily blame the negotiator. Negotiator's done a terrible job of negotiating the contract. And while we'd all feel that they could have done better. Um, we've got so much in our own gift we could get on with and do. Waiting for somebody else to sort out our problem is not a sustainable solution or a strategy. We've got to take control ourselves. Mahesh, nice to see you.
Hi, Mike. Thanks very much, and hi, Nick. Fascinating presentation, Mike. I mean, I've been in pharmacy for 40 odd years, and you encapsulated quite well kind of all the challenges that we're facing. But there are other things that I think that we as a profession need to get engaged with. And I know we've got pressure of time, but it's all the influencing work that we need to do. So currently, I think Nick is on an ICB board. I'm on an ICB, and the ICB. The difference from before is that the ICB has got greater control of the funds, but still traditionally a large chunk of it goes to GPs. However, there are discussions going on about delivering these services in the neighborhood and closer to home. And I think pharmacists need to think about that model and actually have an input, try and get involved to say, yes, in pharmacy we can deliver a lot of these things much more cost effectively, but in the neighborhood for the patient, closer to home. Um, the things that I'm pushing and the words that I'm using are talking about access. We're talking about increasing NHS capacity by making greater use of pharmacists. I'm also saying that pharmacists are the experts in medicine, so we are the natural place where management of long-term conditions should take place. I'm also saying Bevan's NHS is no longer sustainable. Getting patients to rush to the GP surgery is a wrong strategy. So we as an ICB need to change that. We need to change patient behaviors. One way is to try and provide these services away from GP surgeries. So why are pharmacists being funded through ARS funding? And why shouldn't those ARS funded pharmacists be sitting in community pharmacy? I think some of these uh, things that I'm talking about need to be thought about. People need to understand it. But whenever you get an opportunity, you should be talking about all of those things. So access, increasing NHS capacity, uh, providing care nearer home, getting a bigger bang for their buck, all of those things. Understand what we're talking about and try and do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, great as always, Mahesh. I mean, in terms of like developing the relationships locally, I'd encourage everyone to try and host MP visits, get onto your ICB boards if you can do, nudge your LPC to try and get them to tell you what they're doing to help make some of these partnerships a reality. I know Nick's ICB are very pro pharmacy, and they've done a lot of work there to support their pharmacy network. So I think increasingly we will see some local services being developed and funded, but largely, we're all reliant on a national contract that is probably 50% funded at the moment. The money's probably run out by about October. We spent all the money in the first half of the year on pharmacy services, and then the
We
rest of the year
spent
we're
all the
basically
money in
working
the
for
first
free.
half of the year.
Sorry, was there another hand up, or did anyone
No,
else?
no. Oh, yeah. We'll take one more from Tolu. Hi.
Hi, Tolu.
Yes, so thank you so much for that. Thank you. I just want to say a big thank you to Mike, I believe, for the session. I think the session was really powerful and really informative for us. Just on the back of the charges for the consultation, which you've kindly highlighted that it's quite difficult. Some people might find it difficult. And the pharmacist was just sitting by my side, and she's saying that it's quite difficult to really, and I was just saying we can just put a poster on the in the pharmacy to say any consultation lasting more than 5 minutes will be chargeable. And I just need your view on that to see whether it was a sensible thing to do.
Look,
Um, she,
I think obviously you're free to think about what might work for you in your community. So, I wouldn't never say, you have to do it this way or that way. All I can say to you is these are the sorts of questions you ought to be asking yourself. I'm putting consultation fees in. It's easier when you're a prescriber because there's a clear outcome that could be different as a result of having that conversation. When you're providing advice, patients feel a little bit entitled to that sometimes. But, again, just think about all the people that walk through your door, ask people before they're going to waste your time spending 20 minutes talking about something. Are they your patient? Oh, do you get your prescriptions from us? Let me just check you on our records. And be amazed at the number of chances and like, oh no, I normally go to XYZ. Well, why don't you go to your regular pharmacist because they can advise you better on that? And I think people actually respected that to a degree because you've been brave enough to say, I had a conversation with one woman once who it went something like this. Can I talk to the pharmacist? And you ought to train your staff firstly to not make you quite as accessible. So sometimes I will keep people waiting for 10 minutes on purpose because you know the tire kickers. You ask GPs what's happened since they introduced e-consults. Actually, what happened is the bar for engagement with the GP went really low. So then they got bothered about everything, absolutely everything. So now they've all started to raise the bar and say, you can't access for this reason, you can't access for that reason. They started to pull back on that to an extent. I think what we've got to do is say that by spending 10 minutes, that tells me the patient's committed, that they wanna actually come and talk to me. You'd be amazed at the number of people go, oh no, I'll come back later, and they never come back. Probably because it's something minor. It's something that was really trivial, and if it was really trivial, either my counter staff ought to be able to deal with it, or it's probably not worth my time in the first place. Getting people to ask, what it is that the patient wants to speak about. So I've bored my teams to death now. So patient wants to speak to the pharmacist. What's it about? Oh, I don't know. I didn't ask. Like you wouldn't go to the GP practice and go, "Can I speak to the GP?" You get the third degree from the receptionist for a start. And you've got to start building in some of those protections for your time because you are the most valuable and the most pressured resource. You are the bottleneck in every pharmacy. There's only one pharmacist generally. We tried with the two pharmacist model for a while. It was economic madness. Wouldn't go back to doing that again. You've got to do what you can do with the pharmacist that's available. Nick?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So I think there's just a couple of things that I would just sort of add on top of that as well. I think local services and stuff are really are really important. But like you say, the biggest highlight of that £2 billion gap between the national funding model is tricky. Like you say, our ICB have done some stuff where you can get walk-in consultations, so you don't have to get we can actually claim for a consultation that doesn't meet pharmacy first criteria and all that kind of stuff. So I think there are ways in which you can do that, and I would agree with you. Local stuff is important. I would say as well, going back to valuing the time and putting posters up and that kind of stuff. It's about valuing your time as an individual. You wouldn't ring a solicitor and say, can I just ask you some free advice? There's always that classic thing, isn't there, about the person that gets the £1,000 bill for a mechanic fixing their car, which they come out and hit it with a hammer, and the bill breakdown is 50 quid for the hammer and 950 quid for nowhere to hit it. We need to start valuing our time in a very, very different way, which is what I've highlighted from today. I'm gonna, do you know what? Looking at the faces, looking back at me, there's some people that I recognise and I know have worked really hard today. I know exactly. I was on a phone call with Martin Bennett this morning at 8:30 this morning. So Martin's there. I can see people walking around in their pharmacies. I'm still in a pharmacy right now. So, I want to say a personal thank you to you, Mike. Again, I always find your talks absolutely fascinating and make us and thought provoking and practical and things that we can all do afterwards. I would also want to just say briefly to Helen's helped run the show today. So thank you very much, Helen. You've obviously put in some stuff there around the next one about turning freebies into businesses on the 23rd. Also, if those of you that haven't seen it in the chat, Ben, one of our comms directors, is on the call this evening and has just put in there that people have been talking and frustrated about the national contract. The NPA is not the negotiator, but 2,000 national media hits in the last couple of months from our comms team continues to make us relevant and remind the people and the people that make the decisions, why we are so important and why you are so important. And the NPA will continue to represent you in that way. So lastly, have a great evening. If you're traveling home to the pharmacy, traveling home to the pharmacy, that's Freudian, isn't it? Traveling home from your pharmacy, travel well. Mike, again, a personal thank you. Thanks very much for all your time. And we look forward to seeing you, the nearly 100 of you that were on this call tonight. So thank you very much, very, very soon. Thank you.
Yeah, but thank you, everyone. It's lovely to see so many faces here. I'm sure you've all but thank you. If you do want to get in touch, Nick's got my contact details. Get in touch with.
Thanks, Mike, Nick. All the best. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Cheers, guys. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.